Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Nicaragua webinar entitled Remarkable Housing Programs in Nicaragua and Venezuela. I will now repeat this in Spanish. Saludos a todas y todos. Bienvenidos al seminario web de Nicaragua de hoy, titulado Programas de Viviendas Descatadas en Nicaragua y Venezuela. Before we start, let's make sure everyone can access interpretation if you need it. Please look at the bottom of your screen and find the interpretation button with the globe icon. Click on interpretation and then select the language that you want to hear. I will now say this in Spanish also. Antes de empezar, vamos a asegurarnos de que todo el mundo puede acceder a la interpretación si la necesita. Busque en la parte inferior de la pantalla el botón Interpretación con el icono del globo. Haga clic en Interpretación y seleccione el idioma que desea escuchar. Starting now, I will speak only in English with gratitude to our two interpreters, Daniel McCurdy and Camila Mejia. My name is Barbara Larkham, and I'm one of your co-moderators today, along with Nan McCurdy. We'll hear from our speakers in a few minutes, but first we have a few other comments and announcements. We want to thank Yoav Elenevsky for providing technical support. The primary sponsors of today's webinar are Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition and Venezuela Solidarity Network. We also thank our many other organizational co-sponsors who will be listed in the chat. Feel free to use the chat function to offer comments throughout this event, but to keep it working in service of the webinar, we ask you to use it in respectful ways that don't distract from the program. Demeaning comments about an attendee, speaker, or moderator will not be tolerated. But if you have a question for the speakers, please don't put your question in the chat or we may not see it. Instead, click the Q&A button and place your question there. We'll select your questions from the Q&A to pose to our speakers. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to all registrants within the next few days. When it's ready, it will also be posted on the website of the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition, nicasolidarity.com, and on its YouTube channel. If you'd like to become more active in supporting Nicaragua's sovereignty and opposing foreign interference there, please join the International Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition. You can check their website regularly for updates and new resources at nicasolidarity.com. Similarly, you can support Venezuela's sovereignty by joining the Venezuela Solidarity Network at venezuelasolidaritynetwork.org. You can also subscribe to the newsletter, monthly meetings, action alerts, and other notices from the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition at bit.ly/NicaSubs. That's capital N, capital S. That will be posted in the chat for you. The next general meeting is on Monday, October 13th. The coalition meets on the second Monday of each month at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We're also putting other links in the chat to subscribe to the NicaNet email list and Nica Notes and download ebooks about Nicaragua. And now we turn to today's program. We'll hear from the featured speakers, followed by a question and answer period. Please do keep entering your questions in the Q&A throughout the webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Sofia M. Clark. Sofia Clark is a political researcher and analyst with deep ties to Nicaragua. A Master of International Law, she was Deputy Chief of Staff for her uncle, Father Miguel Descoto, when he presided over the 63rd session of the United Nations General Assembly. She's currently at the Miguel Descoto Brockman Center for Development Studies at the National Autonomous University of Nicaragua, UNAN, in Managua, Welcome, Sophia Clark. You have the floor. I'll let you know when you have 2 minutes left.
Okay. Greetings, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. It's been a while since I've been together with our friends from Solidarity. And I want to begin with a disclaimer. I am not an expert on housing. I did this because Nan and Barbara asked me to. And I am a political scientist, so I would like to give a little bit of background. I want to do 4 things. One, I want to give you a little bit of context. I want you to understand the origins of the right to housing in Nicaragua, to understand what the Ministry of, or the Institute of Housing is doing here in Nicaragua, and I want to be able to show you some of the different designs, models that the Nicaraguan government has developed together with international cooperation and also with Nicaraguans that are involved with architects and developers here in Nicaragua. Okay. I think it's important to have a little bit of the before, because otherwise you don't understand the magnitude of the, I can't move this, the magnitude of what the government faced. The 1971 census, this is before the earthquake in Nicaragua, showed that 60% of the population lived in dwellings with dirt floors. 40% had no drinking water, 50% had no sanitary facilities at all, not a latrine, absolutely nothing. 70% lived in homes with only 1 or 2 rooms, so there was no sleeping and kitchen divide, and 25% had more than 5 people in each room. This situation was aggravated further when we had the earthquake in 1972. Prior to the earthquake, already 60% of the population lived in unfit housing conditions. After the earthquake, much of the capital was destroyed and we lost 50,000 homes across the country. Money poured in, as we all know, but the Somoza dictatorship managed to use the funds for their own purposes. They were able to sell blood plasma, they were able to hoard cement, and they were able to find up some of the choicest pieces of real estate in downtown Nicaragua. It's interesting that in Nicaragua, the Ministry of Housing, it was called the Ministry of Housing and Human Settlements, was created literally in the first 2 weeks after the revolution. Okay, and there had been a banking they called for housing under Somoza, but basically they only looked at the financial aspects so that you could see how you could move real estate in a private market. The new MIMBA was meant to eliminate land speculation and invest resources to help people so that everyone could have the right to adequate housing. And it also meant systematizing what the actual situation of housing was. So it had as its functions, in addition to looking at the financial aspects, it included the design, the research, the financing, and the construction of housing projects. Above all, it was meant to begin urban planning in Nicaragua. In October, 2 months after the revolution, the first law, one of the first laws decreed by the Junta de Gobierno, was a law on dealing with illegal subdivisions. They called it the Ley de Repartos Intervenidos. This law assigned the responsibility to the Ministry of Housing and the management of 400 neighborhoods in Nicaragua. 125 of those neighborhoods were in Managua. This was because these were areas that were stigmatized because of landowners who were charging exorbitant rates. Something of 90% of Nicaraguans did not own their home. They rented, and they were paying high rent, but at the same time, they didn't have water, and they didn't have sanitary facilities. So the first initiative of MIMVO was how to give people titles to the land that they had previously occupied illegally, and at the same time provide them services. So instead of paying the landlord, they began to pay the Ministry of Housing, and the Ministry of Housing used what they were giving them to be able to provide the basic services that they lacked. In January, so 6 months after the Nicaraguan Revolution, a tenants law was approved that reduced rent all across Managua. And basically it halved the rent that most people were paying at the time. And it also pegged a maximum on how much anyone could charge rent based on the value, the assessed value of their house. In March, so still less than a year before the Sandinistas came to power, we ascended to the International Covenant on the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which recognizes the right to adequate housing. As the things went on, it became more and more difficult for the government to be able to meet the housing needs. And as you know, groups like CEPAD and APSNICA, which were architects and planners, and CEPAD was the coalition here of the Protestant churches in Nicaragua, began to help along with Technica and others to help fill in the housing gap. A landmark moment in Nicaragua was in 1987 when the Council of State adopted the political constitution of Nicaragua. This new constitution remains in effect today, and Article 64 recognized the constitutional status of the right of Nicaraguans to decent housing. The article says Nicaraguans have the right to decent, comfortable, and safe housing that guarantees familial privacy, and the state shall promote the fulfillment of this right. Now, what's interesting was when Nicaragua adopted that into our constitution, no constitution in Central America recognized this right, and actually very few in Latin America recognized this right. Today, there are about 84 countries that make explicit reference to the right to housing in their constitution, but people have different ways of looking at this right. Some view it as something that you can actually, it's justiciable. You can actually take people to court for violations. And others have it out of as something that you aspire to and that you are expected to take certain measures to encourage the development of respect for this right. Nicaragua views it as a legal right, and Nicaragua has a legal obligation to protect and ensure the enjoyment of this right. When Daniel Ortega returned to power in 2006, this is what the census told us at the time. 6% of the population, well, first of all, we had a housing deficit of 350,000 to 500,000. And we're talking about a population at the time, which was about 5.5 million people. Okay. The 5% of people lived in houses that were single dwelling homes, but there were more than one household living there. 13 didn't have a place for sleeping. 30% of the population was not connected to the electrical grid of the country. Okay. 2/3 of the rural population had no access to electricity. 19% depended on a river or another source for water, and 15% lacked basic sanitation. During the neoliberal period, 332,595 houses were built, and on the average, they built 2,000 houses a year. I'm not going to develop that. If people are interested, it's important to look at what the right to housing incurs. I want to point out that we now, it's no longer MIMVO, we're called the Nicaraguan Institute for Housing, for rural and urban housing, okay? They have an interactive website. And as you can see, if you go to this website, you can click on any one of these regions, and then that department will pop up on your screen. And if you go and pop up on any one of those municipalities, it will tell you immediately what the programs are that are taking place there. So you can literally go to all the different municipal, the 153 municipalities in Nicaragua, and you'll have right there a spreadsheet, how many people have benefited, how many homes have been, how much employment has it generated. And I think that's an amazing thing for a country like Nicaragua. We are on the verge now of reaching an extension from since the Sandinistas took power in 2007 to now. Nicaragua is about to complete 150,000 homes have either been delivered or improved nationwide. Okay, just for the year of 2025, the Institute has provided over 1,100 subsidies. It has provided subsidies for 480 home improvement plans. It has helped 2,786 families in extreme poverty. And it has, it's interesting, Nicaragua helps people that earn the lowest scale of the minimum wage in Nicaragua. So the lower two escalons are actually given special preferences so that they will be able to have access to houses. The strategic goal this year is to complete 7,696 homes nationwide. On an average, Nicaragua is now building 8,000 homes a year. In the capital city of Managua alone, this government has actually built 50,000 homes. Here's just to give you an idea what they're like. There is a large variety of models. And I wanted to show you some of the ones that are the most emblematic. Okay. For some people, I always think the houses look small. And then I start to read how much they are. And for people who've never had anything, having 55 or 60 meters of constructed house is quite an achievement in Nicaragua. Flor de Pino is one of the largest housing projects that was developed in Nicaragua. It's been around for over 10 years. These are an image of the houses. Okay, Nicaragua protects social housing. Obviously, the government can't create homes for everybody, but the government has a special obligation for those who are vulnerable, those who don't have a formal income and are not able to go through a financial system to get credit and don't have a steady income to be able to be eligible for the commercial housing that's offered. So Nicaragua began in 2018 3 social housing projects. And I think you've heard of them. It gets confusing at times because the Bismarck Martinez housing project, I would look at it and I thought that it was in Managua. And I kept, and then you keep hearing that it's all over the country. Basically, it means that these are programs dedicated for low income people, vulnerable people, and people that need help to be able to make the down payment and other things that are required. Okay, one of the projects is called Monte Nuevo. Okay, this was one of the first ones that was done. I want to just show you at the end of the required documentation, in addition to having your, your social security card and you have a certificate of the income that you receive. If you have a job, you got something from your employment, or you have the colia that you use when you pay the INS here in Nicaragua, which is our social security. But you will notice that it also says that in addition to the receipt or income certification, the person should have $230 available for bank fees and other things that may come up during the transaction. Now, part of the goal of the government is to make sure that programs that are certified, that meet the requirements of the Nicaraguan law and are certified by the Institute, you won't have any hidden cost. And they also work to make sure that when you get a program, that you get locked into a fixed rate. They can't be changing the rate. And they also give you a grace period. So for example, you are renting a house and you now want to buy a house. And so you've been approved, you've been pre-approved, okay? You're going to go through the first step, but then you won't be making payments for 6 months. And that's because the government examined how long does it take for people to actually get out of their renting clause? What does it take for them to actually move, the expenses that are entailed in actually moving into a home? Okay, and it also includes people who are trying to do home repairs and to be able to meet that. This is an example of the housing project that I just mentioned. This is outside of the mayor's in Managua. Okay, there was an announcement of this new housing thing, and as you can see, the public just swarmed there. No, this doesn't belong here, but here you go. Nicaragua, part of our programs, all of the housing projects, they go hand in hand with other government priorities, and it has to do with how Nicaragua is planning and trying to plan the development in its different urban centers and also in its rural areas. Okay, we have found that it is very important in Nicaragua to include sports, recreational activities, and one of the big projects in Nicaragua, which is just about ready to be inaugurated, is this Miguel Chocoron Butrago soccer stadium in Nicaragua. It seats 2,000 people, and it's going to be certified by the International Federation of Association Football, the FIFA. Okay, so we'll pass that. This is the house that I was mentioning to you. This is to show you some of the Bismarck Martinez, which are dedicated for the low-income housing. The ministry is responsible, whether they're involved, because a lot of the programs are either done by the ministry or they're done by the municipalities. So here in Nicaragua, in the Alcaldía of Managua actually has 92 programs going on, and that's just the municipality of Managua. Then there's the other departments. The Managua has other municipalities, but they have to certify that the houses meet certain structures. We live in an area of lots of seismic activity, so people have to be assured that their house is safe, that it can actually withstand tremors and certain kinds of earthquakes.
Sophia,
Mm-hmm.
2-minute warning.
Oh my God, then I'm just gonna go quickly. Okay, this what the government has started doing now is we hold national fairs. They're national housing fairs, and the attendance has been incredible. So we just had one at 3 weeks ago here in Managua. It doesn't just examine programs here in Managua, it examines programs nationwide, and it offers families, developers, people who sell construction materials, people who work with the banks. They can all come together, and you can go in a single day. You can get financial advice from a bank. You can get advice from the Ministry of Housing and from all these different actors. I want to point out that here, when there are 10 government institutions that are involved in approving houses in Nicaragua. So you have the Ministry of Housing, the Ministry of Transportation and Roads, you have the ones in charge of drinking water, the ones in charge of plumbing, the ones in charge of the physical catastro, you have the people in charge of electricity power, you have the environmental agency, and you have the National Water Authority, and you have municipal authorities. All of these people are present when Nicaragua hosts these national housing fairs. This is one of the ones that generate a lot of talk because Nicaraguans aren't so used to apartments, and they're not used to having 2-story buildings or 4-story buildings. It's important that we begin to get used to these things. We don't want the city to sprawl out like Los Angeles. That makes it very difficult to provide basic services. We want to look at ways to use spaces, urban spaces, for the common good and be able to provide access to transportation, to be able to provide drinking water, electricity, solar energy in some cases. All of these things are included in the planning that goes into a project that's certified by the government. This is just to give you an idea what some of it. This is the newest one that's been talked about here is called New Victories, and it's a project that was developed together with the People's Republic of China. Okay, and they just turned over 920 houses in just before the 19th of July. So that's created quite an expectation, and they've already been giving out the keys. People have actually moved in now to this area. This is done with cooperation from China, and I want to point out that they call it ayuda solidario. It's non-reimbursable. We do not have to pay China back for the investment that they are making in this program. And the plan is to build 12,000 homes in 84 municipalities in Nicaragua. Each of the houses that they give has an average of a $30,000 value, and the government provides subsidies. Given that it's 30,000, they can provide subsidies from $2,000 to $3,500. And what this does is it actually lowers the eventual mortgage that people will have to pay when they're financing their house. You can see that the program includes 2 great basketball courts, playgrounds, areas that you can go run, gyms, and green areas inside of the project. This is our minister at the Institute of Housing, and she has noted that these fairs that we're having and the different housing projects have actually become a motor in the economy because they provide work for people that live in the area. They provide benefits to families, and then they provide also investment opportunities. This is just to give you an overview of some of the houses, okay? I don't know how that got there. What's that doing there? I'm stuck. It's not moving.
Well, your time is up. Did you have any final words, Sophia?
I want to point out that Nicaragua, one of the challenges that Nicaragua faces is that we continue to have an expanding population. So the demographics are working against us. And it also means that we get a great deal of people who need housing, who don't have a steady income, they don't have steady employment, and finding arrangements for them. We don't want to be a charitable organization. We want to be able to help people become self-sufficient and defend their right to housing. It also means, for example, you're all aware of Nicaragua's susceptibility to hurricanes. And so on the Atlantic coast, you know, in the past, they rebuilt houses and they tended to do them the way that they were used to, which are wooden houses that are built up on stilts. And now we're trying to work with local communities to get more sturdy structures that will be able to withstand. So here's a woman who had a wooden house, and this is the new house that's been developed by the government. These are the ones that the government is trying to promote for people because they can withstand the rain and they can withstand tremors. And I want to just point out one final thing, which is that the law on housing continues to evolve. And I think the fact that it keeps space for this evolution is very important because the government offers subsidies. It also offers sometimes a locked-in interest rate. Sometimes it outright pays for your home. But at other times, it's seeing the raising cost in construction materials, the raising cost of living, and problems with people's income. So the law was adjusted so that they could accede to housing programs that were a little more expensive. So instead of being 10 or 15,000 or even 25, which was the maximum, it's now 30. And for for households with more than one breadwinner, you can actually accede to houses that have a value of $50,000 or more and still receive a government subsidy to keep down your interest rates. Okay. Sorry, it's very, very quick.
Thank you, Sophia. That was really, really interesting. I just have a couple of comments right off the top, which is I'm especially impressed with the transparency of the government and being able to produce statistics for every municipality across the country, and you can click on it. That's really amazing. And also the fact that there are like 10, at least 10 different entities involved in all of this across the country as well. Okay, so thank you very much for that presentation. Before moving to our second speaker, we do have two special announcements. First, we recognize today, September 21st, as the annual International Day of Peace. In honor of world peace, one action that we can take is to follow the movement of the Global Sumud Flotilla, which is a nonviolent convoy of aid and solidarity, which is moving toward the people of Palestine right now. You can learn more at globalsumudflotilla.org, which will be posted in the chat. Excuse me. We also know that some of you will be traveling to New York City on September 25th and 26th in support of Palestine at the United Nations. You're invited to attend a big public meeting called No to War Against Humanity from Venezuela to Cuba to Nicaragua to Palestine, taking place at Riverside Church in New York City on Thursday, September 25th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You can register for this event at, and this will be posted in the chat, okay, but the registration link is tinyurl.com/ all capital letters VZNYC. Okay, so that's Venezuela, New York City. Okay, so that will be posted in the chat. But we're hoping that many of you can register and attend that if you will be in the area. And now an introduction to our second speaker. Elizabeth Santos is a Venezuelan educator, human rights specialist, and licensed social worker. She's president of the Venezuelan Foundation for the Right to Housing, called FundaVivienda, and she is a member of the coordinating committee of the International Alliance of Inhabitants. She's a founding member of the Metropolitan Network of Tenants and Popular Struggles in the city of Caracas, Venezuela, and co-author of the Law for Control of Housing Leases and Protection Against Eviction. Welcome, Elizabeth Santos. You have the floor, and I will let you know when you have 2 minutes left.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation and for the solidarity towards our people. I'm highly grateful. Today, we were invited to speak about housing. In this brief moment, I will try to summarize as much as I can what was the right to housing before and after the revolution, and how after the blockade they have affected this right. Let's start talking about the right to housing. We will analyze how this right was prioritized and how we have resisted these external pressures. We will start talking about the past before the revolution, because what we here call the Fourth Republic, the Fifth Republic is what happened after the arrival of President Chavez to the government. Before, the Constitution of 1962 did not expressly mention the right to housing. There were mentions to solutions to housing, but it was not in favor, and the right itself was not explicit. So people could not complain, present formal complaints. At that time, the vision was capitalistic. Housing was a mere commodity for speculation. Subsidiary state, the role that the state played was just to subsidize for the middle class. There was a historic deficit of more than 1 million. 1.5 million houses by 1998. As we know, the population was smaller.
Disculpe. Um, I'm wondering, are you intending to be showing slides right now?
Yes, I remember. Can I like to ask the comrade to present it because, as I told you, I don't have access on my phone. Can they start the slides?
Okay, yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay, I think this is where we were. We were in this slide. And so I was telling you how housing was during the Fourth Republic. There was this social exclusion, large popular majorities were forced to precarious self-construction because there were no housing policies. And during the petroleum boom, the fields of Venezuela were abandoned around the 60s. There was an excessive migration from the country to the cities, which created a lot of misery, can be seen not only in Venezuela, but through Latin America. We have a lot of precarious constructions in Brazil, Colombia. People built where they could and how they could. When we arrived to do our housing studies, the cartography of the cities said that the hills, the urban hills, were green areas. They were not even listed on the maps. And the logic was to build in the areas where people had the most money, the central areas, the best real estate, the best land where there was access to services and transportation. But around the peripheries, in the neighborhoods where people built as they could, there were no public service. Next. Next slide, please. Thank you. Well, from that small summary that I made you, now we're going to the year 1999 with the entrance of President Chavez to the government. In 1999, they have what is known as the Constitution. The Republic is refunded through a constitutional process, and they build a new constitution. And here, the Article 82 of the Constitution, it says, because it's very beautiful, it says everyone has the right to adequate, safe, comfortable, hygienic housing with essential basic services, giving priority to families and guaranteeing the means of financing, meaning that we go from a subsidiary state to a guarantor and promoting state. And this article, Article 82, led the way to a number of decrees and laws that allowed us to open the way to the democratizing to housing rights. We had very important initiatives like the Urban Lands Law, which gave the power to the communities to be able to do. Now we're going to the next slide, please. Now we are in the year 2011, where all of this experience and became systematized in what we know in Venezuela as the Great Missions, or the social missions that were created by President Chavez. And the mother vision is called the Great Housing Mission of Venezuela. One of the central objectives is the massive construction of decent housing delivered free of charge or with subsidized financing. Here, it is really important to highlight that within the Great Housing Mission Law, it is established that families cannot pay more than 30% of their income, meaning that there's a study of each family, a detailed study, and less than or 30% is what would cover the housing whenever possible. Because I don't know if you remember that we had this torrential rains that left a lot of people affected, thousands of them, and this created the foundation for the Great Housing Mission of Venezuela. Previously, before 1999, people lived in a lot of precarious conditions and meteorological conditions, meaning the rains each year would leave a lot of people, would kill a lot of people. After the situation, this situation was a very important factor. There were a lot of deaths in Venezuela because of mudslides. That doesn't happen anymore, thanks a great deal to the establishment of the Great Housing Mission of Venezuela. Another great focus has to do with the focus on urban areas. They didn't create, as known before, solutions, um, housing solutions, which were like matchbox houses made with poor materials that did not consider the families. In this new focus, they create urbanizations with plazas, schools, commercial areas. Also, there was a priority on collective property and family property. Property deeds are given to women, elderly, and people with disabilities. This, in the past, many women were left without women because the state would put the deeds under the man's name. Now, the deed is for the family. So if there's a separation, they're not going to say, well, this is my house and women have to live. Now there's a great deal of protection for the family. And towards the end of 2024, here, we have updated the number, and through 2024, 2.4 million housing were given. Today, that number is 5,258,000 houses given to the people of Venezuela. Next slide, please. Next, please. Thank you. And here I'll tell you about the tangible achievements with the Great Mission of Housing Venezuela. There was a great reduction of deficit. As I said, 5 million houses given. That's a great achievement. The dignification of housing. Millions of people had access to housing with basic services. All of the houses have all of their basic services, bedrooms with separations, kitchen, dining rooms, everything, so that people can have a dignified life. Also, economy with dignity, generation of employment, urban development, construction of new cities, and the rehabilitation of the cities. I would invite you to come to Caracas to see how the urban landscape changed. Before, where they had lots of parcels of land that did not benefit anyone, or those buildings where they had entire families living in the urban core of the city.
Like I said before, in the Fourth Republic, people lived in the periphery, and you know how they could. Now, many of the people who during the floods didn't have a place to live, now they were prioritized in the new projects. And now they're in databases for the Ministry of Housing, so they can eventually have access to housing. And now where there were a bunch of parking areas, now there's a significant housing. And as a fifth element, and I want to emphasize something here, is the community participation in developing housing. In the development of the plan the housing plan of Venezuela is the participation of communities has always been very important, that they're not passive in this process, that communities are immersed in all the mechanisms in these housing projects. Because to be able to get to this 5 million mark of housing, you had to get people to participate. And now we have 9 laws relative to housing, and those laws allow the dynamization of the process in terms of buying properties, urban properties.
Pero estaban siendo tomados por lo que nosotros llamamos en ese momento los latifundistas urbanos.
But there were big urban landowners that had that now the state has regulated urban landowning.
Terceras personas, es decir, que ellos también invadieron esa tierra, pero como eran lo que nosotros llamamos los amos del valle, pues eran intocables las tierras hasta la llegada de la
But before these big landowners were untouchable. Now with the new government, Fifth Republic, now we were able to really get access to these properties, to these urban land holdings, and develop them for the majority.
Y aquí luego de todo este recuento que yo les he hecho,
and now
viene un nuevo escenario.
There's a new scenario presenting itself with all the geopolitical challenges we have.
Impactó drásticamente la Gran Misión Vivienda Venezuela, y no solo la Gran Misión Vivienda Venezuela,
especially the whole blockade we've been living has greatly impacted Venezuela and the population of Venezuela. We've been asphyxiated financially by the US, by international institutions, financial institutions, and this has made it difficult to get primary materials and essential materials for construction. And this has impacted public services in general. A lot of people complained that there were problems in public services, in electricity, in water provision. But why? But because a lot of the tools we used with those services were imported. Sorry. So now we've been trying to substitute the production of these tools, these materials nationally, but there's been a slow process. We've also been blockaded in terms of access to gas, diesel, that allows us to transport materials, to build, and to even make certain materials for housing. So we've done an investigative project about all the coercive measures that have impacted our projects here. And you can go to this website here, FundaVivienda.org, to see this study. This
el Estado venezolano a través de una política estructurada y bien concebida. Entre los años 2020 y 2025,
between 2020 and 2025, we've had a period of adaptation and resistance. relative to how we were able to do things before.
De verdad se han lucido. Aquí nosotros los venezolanos
Now,
tenemos un problema, pues inmediatamente vemos de qué manera podemos sortear.
As soon as we see that there's a project, a challenge or a problem, we immediately try to find solutions locally and in a participatory way to these problems.
Se introducen los sindicatos, donde se introduce mayor número de actores sociales para dinamizar y que no se pare el proceso. La innovación local también ha sido
Local innovation has been a key factor in terms of producing alternative materials for construction and in terms of prioritizing key projects. Now we're seeing again that I'm gonna summarize here because I see that time is finishing. The housing policy of Venezuela is a historical example of rights, of giving rights to the people. We have a decree, a legal decree in Venezuela that protects housing.
Disculpe, 2 minutos más, por favor.
La Gran Mision Vivienda Venezuela demostró
the Great Mission, Housing Mission of Venezuela has allowed us to confront a structural problem that we had, and now the unilateral course of measures have been a great violation of our human rights here. Thank you very much for your participation, for your attention.
Thank you, Elizabeth Santos. And now we move to the questions and answers portion of our program. And I believe that Nan McCurdy and I will take turns posing questions which our audience has posed in the Q&A. So Nan, first question is yours.
Sí. Hay una pregunta aquí muy interesante en relación a las relaciones con China. Que dice, does the Chinese Solidarity Program help in the procurement of solar panels and other construction materials? The blockade must create problems with acquisition of materials.
I don't know what we're not yet under a commercial embargo by the United States. We were in the 1980s, but not at present. I don't know if the question's directed at me or.
Yeah, it is directed at you, but we can't hear you, Sophia, and Danielle, we can hear you too well. I don't know if something happened.
I can only say that I hope Nicaragua has made great strides in renewable energy, okay, and eolic, geothermal, and above all, solar energy. For example, in Corn Island, in different parts of the Atlantic coast, part of the program with the Dis Norte de Sur is actually to be putting people on solar plants so that they're able to rely on solar energy, particularly in these hard to get to places. And so that is something that Nicaragua has as a goal to continue to put a large proportion of our energy on renewable energy. Okay. In terms of what the Chinese are offering, we're working in many, many different areas with China right now. And all across the spectrum in this last month. So I can't say what that's going to be. Not all the programs are done with this type of cooperación solidario. Okay, I think that is unusual because it's dealing with a socially vulnerable group, and that they made that decision.
Okay, here is a question from Becca Rank. Do you know what percentage of Nicaraguan adults own their own home? Or are there numbers that reflect how quickly Nicaragua is closing the housing gap?
I don't think we're closing the housing gap that quickly, because Nicaragua has a problem that Nicaragua is actually increasing the deficit. I mean, the housing need grows by about 20,000 a year. Okay, and if Nicaragua is producing 8,000, and that's because of what I mentioned earlier, the demographics that continue to expand. You know, part of the strategy, and I think that's important, one of the problems that we had in the 1980s was eventually, you know, the Ministry of Housing had to shift, because the desire was to make sure that areas where you had production activity, which was basically agricultural, we wanted people to stay there. Okay, if people kept migrating to the city, and some people were coming because they were looking for employment, a lot of people were coming because they wanted health services and other things, or because they wanted security because of areas that they were affected by the war. And so an effort was made in the mid-1980s to be able to give certain security to people and to give them more dignified housing. And that was done not just by the Ministry of Housing, it was also done with the Ministry of Agriculture, and it was also done with the Ministry of Transportation, because they were making sure that people had ways to get out the production, the harvest, and whatever. Okay, Nicaragua was extremely vulnerable. But I should underscore that one of the things we learned from the 1980s was Nicaragua did not pass the law. We were going to pass a law on the housing and how you legalize ownership. And as that was coming, it became very contentious. Okay, and at that time, you had a lot of people in the private sector sitting on the fence. They were not getting involved. Industrial output had dropped a lot. They were not contributing to building up houses, because they were kind of on the fence to see which way this thing was going to go. And so that's when Nicaragua had to turn to partnerships with NGOs. And also Nicaragua did different experiments. Like we did experiments, they called it the mini skirt. So part of your house had a cement base and cement walls, and then the other part was made out of wood. Okay, because at that time wood was readily available. And so you didn't get a whole concrete house with iron structures. But we did learn, Nicaragua did several things in the 1980s. They took the programs that had been developed by Somoza and the housing bank, and we found irregularities there. And so they actually developed a protocol and were able to legalize people who should have had titles to their house or to a plot of land and didn't get it. And we were able to do that, and that was never became contentious. And then Nicaragua tried to do something. We didn't have the legal framework. You know, the thing was, we expected that Nicaragua was going to win the 1990 elections, and that we didn't have to worry. We were going to do it eventually, because there was a control, and we had done something called adjudication. We would adjudicate cases, so we recognized that this person was living there and that this person had claims, but we couldn't come outright and give them a title. Okay, when we lost the elections, which was such a terrible blow, after grieving for a couple of days, you know, they had already set up before the elections a national committee for legalization of property titles. And the Minister of Housing was actually moved, after they closed the Ministry of Housing, to that national commission, which was looking at ways that we were actually going to have laws that gave you that legal security. And so now we enacted the law, law 85 and 86. This was recognizing people who had a long-term possession of a house so that they could stay there. And it was also people who were living on property and also had years and years and years of living at that property. And so we legally recognized their claim and their right and gave them titles for that. That became contentious, and then was a minority. Actually, it was a minority in the new neoliberal period. And when the Sandinistas came back to power in 2007, you actually still had some cases in the courts that were dealing with these legal battles. And so Danielle right there came out with a thing that we were not going to pursue those kinds of legal things. We were going to recognize the people that had longstanding ownership de facto of these this property. Now, some people, and I want to recognize it, whenever you deal with human rights, you're always weighing. Because, as I said, it has a social function. Land has a social function. It's not just a commodity. And so the Constitution recognizes private property. Okay, your right to private property, but the Constitution also recognized as a constitutional right, the right to decent, adequate, and fair housing. So the government will have to make decisions at times. What Nicaragua has always insisted on was that when people are here and they take away the property, was to be able to compensate people. So right now, all these programs have to have large infrastructure that goes right in tandem with these projects, because you need to have roads that cross from one part of the city to another. Some of these neighborhoods are going to be several thousand people, and you want them to be able to move freely. And if you've been around here, Managua is the hardest place to move. You can go out into the departments and you have these fantastic highways, probably the best highway system in Central America and one of the best in Latin America. But in the city, we're still working that out. And you're going to find that if you have a program, for example, the Bluefields Highway that connects the Atlantic coast with the Pacific coast, that's a tremendous achievement. Now we're trying to see how you're going to unite the what do you call it, El Triángulo Minero, how you're going to make people on the Atlantic coast also have communication with them, not just east-west, but north-south and in their own departments. You're looking at how you bring water treatment, okay, which didn't exist basically on the Atlantic coast. A tremendous amount of things of making this connectivity and this incorporation into the national life of Nicaragua. So all of these housing projects, they rely on the improvement that Nicaragua is making in road system and electrification, in drinking water, in sewage line. All of those things have to go, which is why it's important. But we're saying Nicaragua doesn't want to just have this senseless expansion. We want to be able to create neighborhoods, real neighborhoods with recreational activities, with stores, with other options, so that people actually have a sense of belonging, and they also have a sense of security that this legal document that they have has been through a prior verification process, gone through different state institutions, and that the person can be certain that this is indeed their house or their plot of land.
Nan, do you have a question?
I do. There are a lot of questions about getting this presentation. So people will get a video, and we'll ask Sofia and Elizabeth if we can actually have their presentations to send to you. There's a question here about have this delivery of housing in Venezuela had to do with taking houses from those that left the country and delivering them to people without housing.
So that would be
No, eso es absolutamente falso. Eso fue una matriz de opinión. Como saben que otro de los ataques es el ataque mediático. Es imposible. La Constitución de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela establece que la propiedad privada también es un derecho humano, o es un derecho humano. Y no hay ninguna posibilidad de que legalmente se transfiera la propiedad a un tercero de una persona que no se encuentre. Es falso.
Gracias. Okay, and this question is also for Elizabeth Santos. And thank you so much for your interesting presentation, by the way. I enjoyed it. This question is from Stansfield Smith, who says, Venezuela has made 5.2 million homes, which probably means about 3 to 4 people per house. That means that maybe about 2/3 of Venezuelans have received new homes. Is that figure correct? And does that also mean that about 2/3 of Venezuelans either had no home or a substandard home before receiving this new home?
Yes, yes, that is true. Is the 258,000 homes. And yeah, Venezuelan families go from 3, 4, even 5 members. And yes, they have benefited from all of this, and there was a high deficit. Remember that before 1999, during the Fourth Republic, there were no national housing policies. There were solutions for dwellings, very concrete cases. As you know, people would build however they could, wherever they could, in inadequate ways and terrains. And a lot of people died because people would build in dangerous lands. And when we had lines like now, that's raining a lot in Venezuela, it rains hard during rainy season. Those homes would come down, and all those people would, those who were able to survive, that were affected, and they would, there was a lot of what they called people coming together in small, people going to family homes, lots of families under one roof. And that was creating a situation that was not very harmonious for the development of the family. And the housing politics, it's one of our flag policies, and one of the policies that, and well, President Chavez also gave it a big boost and a political boost, and with the support of communities and social movements. Sorry, I'm not hearing the speaker.
Should I go on?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to direct this question to Sofia.
Okay.
Yeah. How can you give titles to properties that do not belong to you? What about the human right to property? The state is to guarantee that right, not the private owners. Was that fair? I'm not sure I understand this question, but that's why I gave it to Sofia.
I think you have to understand human rights law, okay? Because whenever you're dealing with human rights issues, you're going to have to weigh them. It's not an easy thing. You go and say, I'm going to defend this right, and all the other ones fall apart. It doesn't work that way. And the right to housing is considered a freestanding fundamental right. And so here in Nicaragua, for example, as we're building these new roads right here in Managua, right here in my neighborhood, as they're building new overpasses, you're going to have people that are being dislocated. They're broadening some of the highways. And so the government has to do it for taking things into public domain out of necessity. It's not because we've targeted somebody, it's because literally the road needs to go through there so that traffic will move. Okay, so people are moving into my own neighborhood because they were, their property was compensated by the government. They use that to be able to buy houses here in this neighborhood. Nicaragua does respect the right to private property, okay? But it also respects other rights. So we have to see at certain times they will come into conflict. And part of governments are being able to weigh. And in a government like Nicaragua, you also want to weigh in on the common good. Okay, so, but I also think it's important because they're not doing it because we want to go against a certain class or a certain group. It's because when we're doing certain kinds of programs, it becomes necessary. Some people have large properties and other people have small properties, but the people who have their little stand that sells, refreshments or sells fruit, they're affected. And so are some of the landowners affected. Okay. There is a sense of that the government has to come to a just amount. And that's actually worked out. They are actually negotiated, but you also have to look at what the catastro and what the land registry has your thing assessed on the basis of the taxes that you pay and those kinds of things. Okay, and you also cannot make it overnight. People have to have a time to be able to prepare and to adjust and to look for an alternative place to live and look for how it's going to affect where they work, whatever. People have the right to do that. So the government has to take those things into account too.
Okay, here is another question for Elizabeth Santos. This is from Jennifer Sullivan, who says, when I was in Venezuela, Chavez was building homes with 3 bedrooms, one for parents, one for girls, and one for boys. Is it still being done that way, or is there a new system for new housing construction?
Sí, se respeta
Yes,
pues el número de las familias que
they
son
respect the
asignadas
number of
de
people
acuerdo al número de
in the
habitaciones.
family.
Se sigue respetando
They continue to
pues
respect the number of family
es lo
members.
que se llama el bien vivir.
Is what they
¿Sabes?
call
Son
living
viviendas,
well.
apartamentos como
These
cualquier
are
apartamento
apartments
de una
or
constructora
dwellings,
privada. No
just
hay
like
diferencia.
any
Son
built by a private
apartamentos
contractor. There's no
confortables,
difference.
con
They're a
sus
comfortable
servicios
apartment,
diferenciados,
comfortable.
sus
They have
baños, su
their
cocina,
separations, their
sus
bathrooms,
salas,
their
las
kitchens, their
habitaciones.
living rooms,
Todo es
their
como cualquier
bedrooms.
apartamento de un
It's
conjunto privado.
like
No hay
any
ninguna
apartment
diferencia y
in
se sigue
a
manteniendo,
private
como
home. There's
preguntó
no
la
difference.
compañera.
And yes, the question, to answer the
I'd
question,
like
yes.
to point out that in Nicaragua, these different models that we have, these different housing schemes, there are some that are actually being built that on purpose. The only room that's enclosed is the bathroom. And then the person that's moving in the house will decide how they want to make the subdivisions within their house. And that was done to give people more flexibility. Some people like a master bedroom, some people wanted an office space, and but it gives them that flexibility. And other ones have 2 or 3 models in a neighborhood, and you get to look at that, and people are looking at the size of their family to see what fits them best.
Nan?
Yeah, I have a question. And then maybe, Barbara's, it will be time to move into last words from Elizabeth and Sophia. Well, my question is, what have you seen in terms of, or what's your sense in terms of the population who benefit from these houses actually feeling happy about it? And I say that because I was involved in a really big housing project here after Hurricane Mitch, more than 400 houses with lots of different groups that came together to decide you know, who was the next family that would get a house. And my feeling was that it was really only a few people that were happy with this. It seemed like a lot of people could only focus on, well, I should have gotten this or I should have gotten that.
I think that has a lot to do with the person's personality. Not necessarily with what's being offered, because some people, no matter what you do, are gonna complain. But, and also, us Nicaraguans, we tend to complain a lot. You have to take it in stride.
Yeah.
But I do want to underscore something that Elizabeth brought up. Nicaragua, all the people who are here, that Nicaragua was consistently, and I'm talking about for a decade or more, consistently got excellent performance evaluations from the IMF and from the World Bank. Okay, and now, because they've been closing off those funding sources, Nicaragua was able to build some of the roads and able to do some of the infrastructure program that it did because it had more access to some of these multilateral institutions. And the campaign they're doing now to stop our access to the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, which has been an important source of financing for a lot of these different projects that Nicaragua is doing, it's very, very difficult. And you will see when you look at some of the programs, these fairs that I mentioned before, I think Nicaragua is becoming more and more professional in how they organize them. And you get about 9,000 people going to these fairs, and they last 2 to 3 days. And like I said, you have this assortment of people there for your specific needs. And the government even provides subsidies for people who own land and are building their house or have to make remodeling on their house for whatever reason. But we are dealing, you will see that as developers come, there is a page that looks that they have to make sure you're not under sanctions from the Security Council, that you're not under sanctions from certain people in the European Union and stuff like that, which is absurd. But, people run a risk because, like, you see in Cuba, you do a program there and then it's going to affect you somewhere else. If they want to do, work in the United States or something like that. So that is that's a cumbersome thing that's affecting Nicaragua's ability to progress as quickly as we would like. And it's just a criminal thing, because the ones who are the most adversely affected by these are the people who have the most need, the most vulnerable.
Okay, thank you. I think this will be the last question of the day, and then we'll go into final words. There's a question about how is housing financed by the government in both Nicaragua and in Venezuela? So each of you could maybe just quickly answer about financing.
I'll go first. Okay. Nicaragua actually, all programs, just about across the board, any programs that we do in Nicaragua puts in something. Okay, some people give our bigger programs and Nicaragua gives less. But many of the housing programs that are being developed, particularly through the municipalities, are being done by revenue that's raised by the government, and it comes out of the government's budget. So it's part of our fiscal budget, because Nicaragua dedicates a very large portion of its budget to health, education, and other social services, and housing is considered one of those social services. So a considerable amount of the funding comes from the Nicaraguan budget itself. Okay, and I think that's important for Nicaragua, because we can't stop dead in the water if we don't get help from outside. It's something that we have to continue. And I don't know, I can't exaggerate how incredible and commendable I think the work is that the Nicaraguan government has done. We are one of the poorest countries in the hemisphere. We have tremendous odds against us, and yet you're seeing progress in Nicaragua. You're seeing, you know, the idea of having hospitals in the department is that people don't have to come to Managua to get health services, to have certain types of hemodialysis, or to get certain treatment for cancer. We want to be able to offer sales in the different regions so that we can create hubs where you're going to be developing that region for the people who live there. And that's part of the strategy that underscores this housing. That housing is part of an integral package, a holistic package that has to be thinking of the person who's going to age, of a person with a disability, of a person who may lose their job. Okay, some of the houses actually you are required to get an insurance. Okay, the bank requires that you get an insurance so that if you're temporarily unable to work, that they have some kind of a guarantee that you're going to be taking measures to meet your obligations. But the state is also aware of what happens when you have exceptional circumstances. Those are all things that the government takes into account. And I feel in the 1980s, Nicaragua basically gave titles to over 200,000 people. And we brought basic services into countless communities. Today, when you look at the fact that every single municipality in Nicaragua, to one extent or another, has received benefits in the housing program, there is no exception. Okay, I think that's a commendable thing and makes me very proud.
And Elizabeth, how is housing financed in Venezuela?
Venezuela.
Bueno, en Venezuela,
In
el
Venezuela,
financiamiento es
the
100%
financing
a través
is
del gobierno
100%
nacional.
through the
Recuerden que
national
hablamos
budget,
sobre la Gran
the
Misión
national
Vivienda
government, and we're
Venezuela, que
talking
es una
about the great
política del Estado.
project
Por
of
lo tanto,
how
el
brick
Estado es
housing
quien lo
project.
financia.
So
Ese
it's, you know,
financiamiento viene
it's the state
directamente de
that
los mismos
finances it,
petroleros,
and
y
that comes
también
from
existen
oil revenues
los
and taxes,
fondos, el fondo habitación, esto varió. Entonces el
because
Estado
we have different
venezolano,
funds
de
that
lo que
fund
son
different
los fondos
types of
sociales,
projects.
hace un grandísimo esfuerzo para seguir avanzando en el tema de la vivienda. Y
So-
antiguamente, antes de los
So
bloqueos, teníamos los fondos, que eran los
Sorry,
fondos
it's not
habitación,
good.
aquella porción del salario que pagaba el trabajador y el patrono, y con eso hacían un fondo que es la ley de la política habitacional. Pero luego de esta situación de bloqueo, luego de esta situación
Now
que se
that we've
agravó,
been
pues eso está un poco
blockaded,
paralizado. Pero es
the traditional system of
directamente a través del
financing
Estado venezolano.
normally it's through the state, just like in Nicaragua.
Barbara and Nan, I just want to point out, you know, Nicaragua overall, sometimes you hear complaints because Nicaragua, we pay taxes. And it seems every year we're paying more taxes, and particularly property tax. Our electricity in Nicaragua is very expensive. But the difference here is you pay your taxes and we're getting something back for it. These are what make the government able to do these programs.
I wish it were seen that way in the United States. Thank you, Sophia.
No sé
Okay.
no sé si es
I don't
posible
know
que
if-
agregue algo más sobre la pregunta que nos hicieron.
If I can add something else that I forgot, we've also
algunos urbanismos a través de los acuerdos
in some
bilaterales con
urban
estados
projects,
como
we've
Chile,
had
Rusia,
bilateral
Vietnam, tenemos
bilateral
unos
projects
urbanismos
with
preciosos en un
China and
estado que se llama
Russia.
La Guaira,
We
que fueron
have in
financiados
the
por,
state of Guaira,
por
we
Bielorrusia.
had projects
Rusia también
financed by
tenemos
Belarusia.
un convenio China-Venezuela donde se
We also have
construyó un urbanismo gigante.
we also
Los
have a
eran
project
espacios
with
de un fuerte
China
militar.
where
En la ciudad de
we
Caracas se construyó un
developed
urbanismo enorme con
enormous
China, que es que le decimos los chinos, el
urbanizations,
urbanismo
urban
chino.
projects.
Y entonces a través de
And
acuerdos
so
bilaterales,
through
binacionales,
bilateral
algunas
treaties,
naciones aliadas se ha logrado la
accords, we've been
construcción de estos
able
urbanismos.
to
Eso era todo lo que
construct
quería añadir.
massive urban projects.
Cross your fingers, everyone. I'm hoping for one of those high-speed trains that China makes to come to Nicaragua so we can move around really quick.
Well, thank you to our speakers for wonderful presentations, and thank you to the audience for great questions. If there are any final words, you have like maybe 1 minute apiece, the speakers to add anything else, but I think you probably said pretty much everything you wanted to, but if you have one final thing, you're welcome to say it now.
I just want to thank everyone for the work that you do every day and keep up the fight.
Igualmente, gracias por esa solidaridad.
Yeah, thank you for your solidarity and thank you for being in favor of the people. And here I'm gonna invite you to check out some links that I'm gonna share with you to see our work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll just add, in case anybody didn't hear the announcement earlier, that yes, this webinar is being recorded. It will be shared within the next 2 or 3 days, both on the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition website, which is nicasolidarity.com, and on the YouTube channel of the Solidarity Coalition. And we will talk with the two speakers about getting their PowerPoints and being able to share those as well. Nan, any final words from you?
It was a great webinar. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you all. Bye for now.